Well, hello and welcome. It's another night of STEM Fest, and tonight the topic is the digital divide. And so I'm Brendan McAdams with ETC Baltimore, and we'll kick off things by having everyone introduce themselves. So Stephanie, why don't you take it off?
Hi, my name is Stephanie Alfie. I'm the Tech Center the Tech Center Director at the Digital Hardware Foundation.
Hi, I'm Ed Mullen. I'm the Executive Director of the Baltimore Robotics Center.
Hi, I'm Ashley Greenspan. I'm a Public Affairs Manager at Crown Castle.
I'm Jonathan Moore, founder and CEO of Rowdy Orbit.
So to kind of kick things off, I'm going to take a quick moment and just say a little bit about what Wikipedia calls the digital divide, and it's the unequal access to digital technology, including smartphones, tablets, laptops, and the internet, and it creates a division and inequality around access to information and resources. I think that's probably enough for now. So, and with that, I'm going to start with Jonathan, if you don't mind, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Well, let's start by kind of talking a little bit about the problem. What does the digital divide really mean?
I look at the digital divide as being a huge umbrella. And when we look at that umbrella, it was exposed during COVID when the youth weren't connected to actually an education and sent home without internet access as well as devices. And when you start to look at divide, and there's a term that starts to come up now, it's divestment. And it's divestment in human capital to maximize their potential within a digital world. And so when I view the divide, I look at it from a community standpoint of view on how do we make sure that with the things that we've done in the physical world doesn't translate over into the digital world. So when you start to look at facial recognition, that can be also considered a digital divide because it doesn't recognize pigmentation. When you start to look at people who are in underserved communities who do everything via a mobile phone, there's still people that have platforms that can't engage individuals who may need social services or mental health support. And so when you start to look at the whole chasm of it, all those things create a Grand Canyon gap for people to be able to be included into modern day society.
Stephanie, how about you? Any your perspective? Any examples of how it manifests itself here in Baltimore and the area?
Absolutely. Like Jonathan said, when the digital divide had been around before COVID, right? You had households in Baltimore that didn't have access to broadband internet, or the knowledge to use it. It's one thing to have the device but not know how to access the internet, not know how to utilize, email, right? Those basic things that certain generations take for granted are really becoming a foundational part of our lives. And not knowing how to use it is almost as bad as not having technology at all. So that access, that education to use it is also a big part of that digital divide. And it's the part that we work mostly in at Digital Hardware Foundation and teaching youth. But we also saw, like Jonathan said, like when, students went home without internet, right? Went home without devices and go learn, but without any of the tools you need to do it. Like, how do you address that? How do you address seniors that needed to use the internet, have to have an internet connection, have to have the right device, have to have an email account in order to talk to their doctors at a time that was really scary medically, right? That's a divide. You even have neighborhoods in Baltimore City currently that don't have access to internet whatsoever, right? They don't have Wi-Fi. They don't have the infrastructure in those neighborhoods to access the technology. So maybe that household has one cell phone between parents and children, maybe that has a mobile device, and that's the only way you can access the internet. You're really missing out on a lot of different parts of our society, or things that we kind of take for granted in our society today.
And before we kick this thing off, you were talking about some of the countervailing forces that are at work to kind of prevent adoption of technology or the kind of free availability of technology. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, there's like a contention between the public sector trying to make a profit on broadband and wireless and connectivity, and sort of the social good. I make the analogy with electricity. Like, it is not economical to run electricity into rural areas.
Right.
However, this country decided everybody should have electricity, and to this day, we spend a lot of money to run power lines and things like that to farms and places like that because we want everybody to be on the same playing field. And that awareness that there's a digital, the first thing is the awareness. Like, so many people take it for granted that everybody has devices and knowledge and connectivity. And even before COVID, great points about the COVID thing that brought up with elderly and students. But I can remember getting called by a school that wanted to know if we could bring PCs in because they had nothing but tablets for these elementary school kids. And they had to take the PARC test. And that is done on like a desktop with a mouse. And these kids didn't know how to use a mouse. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And it was this awareness. Their whole world had been tablets and smartphones. And so when it goes to take this major important test that, you know, funding is done based and grade schools based, they were literally standing in line to use the small number of desktop computers with mice to take the PARC test.
Wow.
Ashley, anything you'd like to add?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, when it comes to the digital divide, access, as we've all said, is so critically important. And that's really the piece of the equation that Crown Castle is focused on. We know that 40% of Americans get online mostly using their smartphone, right? So what that means is that we need wireless networks that are able to support really kind of any use case. And what we're going to see in the transition from 4G to 5G is networks that are up to 100 times faster. So I'm not an advocate saying that like wireless is a replacement for a wired connection, but as you move from 4G to 5G, you'll actually see that use case become that much better. And so we need to make sure that we're investing in wireless networks and that they are accessible, because so many Americans are relying on a smartphone to get online. And then how do we make sure that those networks can also support other devices?
I'm actually a little experienced with that now because I moved recently and was able to. My wife, my internet connection is a wireless only connection. It's just 5G, and it seems to function, and it's less expensive, and it was easy to set up, and so that you may be right. That may be the something in the way of a solution for this problem, or at least could be.
I think it's part of the solution.
Yeah. So how does this impact the community? Does anyone want to kind of weigh in terms of how it, the specific impact it has on things like jobs or property values or crime or how does it? Does anyone want to weigh in on how that this digital divide affects that?
I can start. You have to look at when you have a wired connection in a lot of underserved communities, it's for a blue light camera. So it's aspects of surveillance.
Yeah.
And so it's not really accepted. It's like, how are you surveilling or spying on me? And when you look at certain neighborhoods, it's known that bringing in high-speed internet can raise the home prices by like 3.1%. Which is anywhere between 5,000 and 5,500.
Yeah.
In certain neighborhoods, based on your socioeconomic area you live in, that's great. 3-bedroom home plus, you get added home value, which is wonderful. But if you live in an underserved community and you're on a fixed income, because a lot of underserved communities, the people that own their homes are elderly individuals.
Yeah.
Now, when you're on a fixed income, you're talking about property value that's increasing on something that you didn't make capital improvements in, and you get a bill and you're shocked.
Yeah.
So I think that when we start to look at aspects of the community from one side, but on the other side, the positive side, it's like, okay, well then the youth who are adopters are loving it, because now I get better gaming speeds. I can communicate with my friends from wherever they are around the world. Video, there's no buffering. And now I feel like instead of me going to a location, I can actually engage the world from my home and where I live. And I think that's vitally important, because I think that plays into building a healthier community and the mental health of individuals for the long haul. It's just getting past those barriers and start to really focus on the positive, but not really look at it as a way of gentrification or displacement. But I think they can all coincide with one another.
I think what I would add about property values is you have to remember 70% of Americans don't have a landline, right? So when you're thinking about living in an apartment or a house, for a lot of people, it's a non-starter if you can't make a cell phone call, right? Because they're not going to get a landline because they haven't had one for years, and that's the way that we're trending. So it's incredibly important from a value perspective.
The property values not having a landline?
So what I'm saying is having wireless access is incredibly important because a lot of folks, 70% of folks, don't have a landline and they're not going to get one, right? So if you can't make a cell phone call from your house, then like that place is off the table.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure. So where do we go from here? How do we begin to solve this? I mean, what are the obstacles that, first of all, what are the obstacles to solving this problem? I mean, Ed, you talked about just the conflicting interest between public and private sector in some cases. What else is in the way? There's digital literacy. How do we tackle that?
I mean, I think, there are going to be a lot of federal and state funds coming down the pike for addressing this issue, right? But we know that trust in government is at an all-time low. And so one of the things that we've got to be thinking about is how do we design programs and roll out programs in partnership with trusted community partners to make sure that those programs are successful. Because if government acts alone, I think we're going to end up in a situation where we have some programs that are not well designed and are not adopted by the folks that they're actually intended for.
Yeah, and in that beautifully said line of work, we're looking to is like, how do we get youth involved in that conversation, right? Because schooling and education, access to education was such a big part of why that digital divide conversation really made national news. Members of my organization are thinking about how do we make sure that youth are engaged in those ARPA money conversations? How are we ensuring and working with different municipalities to be like, hey, as you think about equitably distributing that money, let's create a youth panel. Let's make sure that youth voice is included in it, right? Because it wasn't until you stood up and said, hey, Comcast Essential, Zoom ain't cutting it on this internet connection, that it really became an issue of equity, an issue of access, because they were the ones in the classrooms that weren't able to do what they needed to do, even with the proper technology, even with the knowledge to do it. Like you said, there were bigger things in play that really kept that off the table for them. So it's like, how do we make sure that all the stakeholders that are involved in these, in the digital divide are getting voice and access to that? Is definitely an interesting body of work that's coming out of that.
And now, so far, is our focus more, I mean, there's the Biden's American Jobs Plan funded a certain amount of money for this. You could argue that it wasn't nearly enough. 65 million, I think, over 8 years. 65 billion over 8 years. But I think the estimates were it needed to be 3 or 4 times that to really make an impact. How much of that is Baltimore seeing? How much of that is Maryland seeing? Does anyone know? I mean, is there and where will that end up? Where will that money end up? What will it be used for? Anyone know?
I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I know that each state is entitled to at least $100 million. And then there's additional funding on top of that. That's done by like a formula.
Okay. And do we know how much of that is rural versus cities? And no, yeah.
Yeah, I think it varies greatly. And the other thing about it is when you're talking about this stuff, you have to think about, I don't know what the right term is, sustainability. Like it needs maintenance. It needs support. It needs service and upkeep. And, you don't just spend a ton of money, set up some antennas and walk away from it. Like, you have to have a plan for the long haul that, works for whatever system you go in. Different people are like pulling for municipal systems, and other people are going, leave it to the private sector and then figure out a way to underwrite the private sector. But, it'd be very Pollyannish to think it's like a one-time spend and you fix it.
Mhm.
That's the part that, so Jonathan and I were involved in like laptop distribution during the pandemic. And one of the things that became very apparent was you needed like support and ongoing, attention, because just because you handed somebody a device does not mean you've solved the problem. And then Digital Harbor jumped in on the distribution, God bless them. And then another organization in town, PCs for People, basically like that. Now people ask me, call me, I've got, a pallet of devices. I'm like, send them over to them, because I don't, even though the folks involved with the robotics center have the capability to like repurpose them, we're not doing support calls. And that turns out to be a hugely important part of the process.
An ongoing part of the process. Absolutely.
So at the start of the Industrial Revolution, it was public schools were kind of created to help feed the factories that were being built, because they needed people who could read instructions and write and so forth. And so the public school system really got a huge boost as a result of industrialization. So what's going to happen to kind of maintain that digital awareness and the digital education for people as we move forward towards blockchain and metaverse and all this other stuff that I hope I don't live to see?
It's right around the corner. I know what you're talking about. It's here. The future's here. I know for us, it's really thinking about, when we talked about STEM education from 10 years ago, it was like, ooh, how do we build the next generation of STEM leaders, right?
Yeah.
And how do we build the future engineers and scientists and technicians? And now I really think that when we think about building these STEM programs and these technology programs, it's about just building basic 21st century skills.
Yeah.
It's not just about preparing kids for specific jobs. It's preparing kids for the 2050, 2060 workforce that they're going to be in. And that the technology is going to be everything. Every job is going to be a digital job in somewhere. Every single job. There's not going to be a career field that exists that doesn't take technology in some way. And thinking more broadly about preparing technology and making sure that our kids have those skills for whatever workforce that they're prepared for, just like reading, just like writing, right, is going to be such an important way that we really reframe the work that I do not at school time, the work that we do in formal education, right? Like, how do we really make sure that that is ingrained and fundamental, because it truly is going to be.
Is that going to be? Is that also going to be unequally distributed? That education are there ways to make that sort of education distributed equally throughout the school, throughout the youth? Or
and I think that's the current challenge. Yeah, that's the current challenge. I think that's the current challenge that as we're recognizing that needs to be an important part of education. That's the second question of how do you make sure that it's equitable in the school day, out of the school day. I think that's an evolving thing. I don't think anyone really has the answer to it right now. I think it's going to change as we go. I can give examples of how people are going about that work.
But I think that, like you rightly point out, that like all of the jobs are going to be kind of touching tech, right? But they won't all be high tech, right? Mm-hmm. And so part of it is also, you pointed out that these networks, you don't just like build them and then they're like there forever and they don't need to be touched again, right? There's ongoing operations and maintenance, and we need high-tech workers and also other workers to build these networks. A lot of that is fiber splicing, it's construction. And we're talking about, billions in GDP that will be generated as a result of building these networks that need to be maintained and operated, forever. And so there are the high-tech jobs and making sure that we're training folks for that equitably, but it's also about, I think, like partnerships with technical associations and community colleges to make sure that everyone has the skills that they need to participate in the digital economy.
So this is timely. There's a press release from the White House, how President Biden celebrates new commitments towards equitable workforce development for infrastructure jobs. And I think that, this is going to spur a lot of innovation and entrepreneurship behind it. Which is going to be great because it's going to fill a lot of gaps that a lot of large institutions that aren't used to pivoting can be filled.
Right.
And so we can make this available on your site so people can just take a look at it. And so there are a number of, it's like 150 employers as well as national organizations that are involved. And so you start to see the money and the care start to funnel down, but it's hopefully it continues to funnel down and not get bottlenecked in one area. So we'll make it.
So I'm serving up softballs here too. One of the things that you can do as you roll out broadband solutions, wireless and everything else, is you could just roll in people that are highly trained people out of Northern Virginia that have been doing it for 20 years, or you can use people in the community and teach them how to put up antennas and teach them. You want to jump in here?
Yeah. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity to really build out hyperlocal workforces.
Yep.
So that way people can work where they live, because we know that transportation is a barrier to employment.
Yeah.
And usually in employment, high level of employment, you always have to travel 2 buses to get where you're going. And you know, if it rains or snows or there's any type of construction, that's 2+ hours and you're going to be late.
Yeah.
And it's not a plus for an employer. So I think that's one way to do it, because you have a lot of individuals in communities that are insanely smart, but went a different direction because that was the economics of their community. So I think that you can repurpose a lot of that mindset to become a hyperlocal workforce. But also I think that you can reach within the school systems to really do some tech training around Wi-Fi installation. It's like I'm a board chair over at New Song, and one of the kids in 7th grade, he did a presentation on the barriers to Wi-Fi. I'm like, damn, we get him. Somebody has to hire, because his mindset is already there. And so we're reaching out through New Song to figure out what child's mindset at 6th, 7th grade is already thinking about Wi-Fi and wireless networks, to really, they understand the barriers. Okay, well then how do we give them the solutions? Because they're native to it, and what they may come up with might be far advanced than what we institutionally think about. So I think that we need to mine the assets in these, we need to start looking at people as assets and start mining the human assets in these communities. Because like they say, the ones that are closest to the problem is also closest to the solution.
Absolutely, yeah, and I'm not sure this is also you're throwing out there, but yeah, like how do you also get the solution for members of the community? So a big project at Digital Harbor Foundation is Project Waves, where a member of the Digital Harbor community saw this need of internet access and leveraging the technology of mesh networks to put antennas on apartment buildings in low-income communities to give those whole communities internet access, right? They're hiring locally. The solution came from the locally. We're supporting the Baltimore City community, and luckily we got able ARPA funds in order to do so and grow and support that work. So how do you build solutions for community from the community members, and then continue to make that sustainable with the right support, but with and through community. So there's definitely homegrown solutions and things that are happening. But I think even in our work, like how do we keep fostering the next generations and keep that going?
With huge economic upside, because now you're increasing the household income in that community and keeping consistent revenue in that community, especially when it's hyper-local or people that are local. Because if I don't need to take buses to get to work, and I can walk or ride a bike to get to work, well, where am I going to spend my dollars?
Yeah, so competitive robotics is somewhat of a contrived competition. So you have to teach people how to do it, and it's sort of outside the norm. One of the other competitions is competitive hacking. And what's funny about that is they already know how to do it, because they're already doing it.
Yeah.
Because they're solving their real world problem of doing whatever they're trying to do. But the other part about it is they learn so much about networks and firewalls and like laptop repair, because they're trying to repair their own laptop.
Mhm.
So one of the things that we could be doing a much better job within the school systems from a CTE, VOTEC perspective is the business community talking to the schools and going, hey, let's institute some VOTEC pipelines for these skill sets. Like even just like PC repair, just being like Geek Squad
Mhm.
or whatever. Because these are not like, I gotta go to 4 years at Carnegie Mellon to do. Like if you can fix PCs, or that moment when you make your first Cat 5 cable and it actually works, like that's a magic thing, but you can't do it unless you have a crimper and you have like the ends and cable. And it's to me, there's a huge opportunity to do much better within the IT vocational technology pipeline within Baltimore City and even in area counties. And to go back to the competitive hacking, some of the top competitive hacking teams are in the greater Baltimore region, but none of them are in the public schools.
Yeah.
So there's an opportunity to move stuff, and part of that is just like knowledge and mentoring and the business community getting involved with the school system. And I work with school systems in other states where they're doing this much better. And I think sometimes we in Baltimore are so college fan focused and so like, the school systems know what they're doing, that the business community doesn't go like, let's go to a new song and create a PC repair career path or whatever.
But I think part of it is also making it really plug and play, right? And so like if a business could come in and say, hey, I can give you 5 people who can each give you an hour to help you to develop a, 10-week course for my need, then that would be like pretty plug and play, right?
Mhm.
But the infrastructure doesn't exist. And so I think it's a matter of kind of figuring out how do we work in partnership with public schools to make sure that we're making it a light lift for the business community so that we can prepare the next generation of leaders without necessarily taking away from the primary, like, everyday business that they have to do, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, but I think if I could, so the VOTEC pathways, say like automotive at Mervo, like the business community basically just comes and goes, if you would teach them this, we'll be at the end of the graduation stage. And that just freaking works all day long. Culinary arts is another one that just rocks within Baltimore City Public Schools. And so like, I'm like, if we were better, and maybe it takes a little bit like donating some equipment, sending some people over now and again, but the lift is really like they come to me and they go like, how do we get these people to hire our people? And I'm like, you need to go talk to them.
Yeah.
And you need to like define it. And they're like, well, what certs do they need? I'm like, I'm not sure it's a cert thing. I think it's like, we need a bunch of people that can lay fiber and run through an attic and use tools and be detail oriented. And here's the tools and the fiber. Like that's the part. And there's a huge opportunity in that space right now because changes to the way that money is allocated for VOTEC CTE within the Maryland school systems is very much based on how many successful apprenticeships and stuff you as a school are able to do. So they're like very interested in talking.
That's the VOTEC schools that are incented that way?
The VOTEC departments at like North Avenue, they're like, how do we get this done? And then they'll figure out the schools.
Because high schools typically are not focused that way. They're typically focused on who's going to college. Right?
Well, in Baltimore City Public Schools, there's certain schools like Mervo, West Edmondson, Carver High School. They're VOTEC. They're teaching cosmetology,
Yeah.
bricklaying,
Okay.
automotive, and then you have schools like Poly and City and Western that are college bound focused. But in Baltimore City, there are a ton of schools that are like these kids. And I don't know if you know this, but in Baltimore City high schools, you get to pick which high school you go to.
Right.
And if there's too many kids picking that school, it goes into a raffle. Do you know what school has the most tickets in the raffle?
Poly,
Mervo,
Mervo, really?
the VOTEC school, because Mervo is associated with successful job training and acquisition
Yeah.
of the job.
Well, that's definitely different from the county, where, because I have some experience with Towson High, and there's almost a stigma if you're not going to college,
That,
which is
that's a
which is
fair
real shame,
evaluation.
right? It's really, they highlight the people that are going to college, and if you're not going to college, that you're sort of, it's notable. It really is a black eye, you know?
Yeah, but that narrative, excuse me, that narrative needs to be challenged
Of course.
because nobody talks about the 20-year debt that comes with having a good time for 4 years.
I'm 100%. No, I think,
I'm not discounting it.
But also that you
yeah.
could be in Stephanie's program and be ready for a job
Yeah.
at the end of the program, right? By the end of high school.
Yeah.
And so why sacrifice all those years of income potentially? Especially in an economy where we're gonna have fewer and fewer jobs that require a 4-year degree.
Yeah, and even some of those other schools, that don't necessarily have VOTEC, but have things like Project Lead the Way, that have these biotech programs where at the end of 4 years of school, you get 2 years associates, right? We discount that, the value of an associate's degree of a community college degree where, it's not the huge financial investment a 4-year is, but you're gonna be able to join the tech, the workforce, not just necessarily tech, but the workforce, coming right out of, a couple years out of high school and be able to really, start a valuable career that way. I mean, there's all these pathways. And I think a common thread between all of our work is like, how do we make sure that, the folks in the communities are connected to these pathways, that these pathways are leading us to better economic development. That's the thread, right? That's the thread between the digital divide. That's the thread in all the work that we do. It needs to be said, and that needs to kind of stay the narrative.
So, and the other thing is the narrative's changing. Your point is well taken. I actually work with high-level people in CT in Baltimore County Public Schools because they run the robotics program.
Yeah.
And because of the change in the way the money's allocated,
Yeah.
they are like Delaney High School has an HVAC program.
Yeah.
And the people that run these VOTEC programs are trying to get work study going. Where you senior year, you leave midday and you go work for an HVAC company or a cable company or whatever. He's like, I got money for Uber. I got money to pay for testing, like certifications. Like, we just need kids and employers to do it. So the narrative is changing there.
Yeah, I hope so.
And Mike Rowe and people like this,
For
stir
sure.
the pot up.
Yeah.
On,
Well, not only that, it's just, that's how a lot of people learn, period, like hands-on.
Yeah.
Like, I know, I grew up in an era when you had shop class and,
Yeah.
and throughout high school, and you learn, that's how I learned, by doing things in a 3D world and, making mistakes and having things break and having to back out a piece, and, that's how I learned stuff. And so if you don't have that as an opportunity, so even if you don't want to end up being an HVAC expert, but it's a way to learn all sorts of problem solving skills, responsibility, work ethic, those sorts of things. And so kind of in the last half of this conversation, we've talked about some of the problems and what's going on, and how those problems impact the community and individuals and so forth. I did a little homework to do this, and it turns out Maryland is doing way better than most states. I mean, by far. As bad as things are, or might be here, they're way ahead of large parts of the rest of the country. That said, what are the sorts of things that we can do specifically here at an organizational and at an individual level to kind of address this? I mean, and we'll kind of take in order. So, Jonathan, why don't you start? I mean, what are some practical things we can be doing to tackle this?
Well, I think the first thing that we have to do is we have to readjust our mindset and acknowledge the reality that exists by addressing certain aspects of institutional structural racism. I think that by acknowledging certain things, then when you start to build and you start to convene people, there's a level of empathy if you can ever get there, but there's a way to not ignore someone's trauma. And I think that it's so easy to in the city to ignore someone's trauma because that's not where you live. Because you not often do you have to make that left or that right. You can keep going straight to that neighborhood. And I think that's, for me, that's a first step is acknowledging your fears about people.
I think one of the ways that we think about it at Crown Castle is how do we create the right partnerships with nonprofits that are doing the work. And so we partnered with the Digital Hardware Foundation. We're supporting free Wi-Fi at Enoch Pratt right now. And I think, the more we can kind of share the opportunities in our industry and make sure that folks have the tools to prepare for economic opportunities in the industry, I think that's really one of the things that we're focused on.
Yeah. I think Maryland does pretty good, but it seems to be a world of the haves and the have-nots. Like, we have this donut around the city of prosperity and expectations and stuff like that, and not so much within the city itself. And just within the school system, have the same expectation. Capability and digital, inherent skill set is equally distributed. Let's start focusing on how we utilize the school system, nonprofits, and corporate partners to take better advantage of the huge natural resources. And Maryland has 20,000 open computing jobs. How much wealthier would we be as a state if we would just fill 5,000 of those jobs? So
How do you address that though? We have universities around here that have expertise, that can train. How do you tackle that?
So you tackle it by working with the folks within the school systems and making sure kids are prepared to go to the university. We have kids that do competitive robotics or writing programs, building robots. They go down to UMBC to try to get in the engineering program. They're like, you can't come in, you don't have calculus. Well, my high school didn't teach calculus.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's crazy. And the other thing is figuring out pipelines. I give you an example. In Richmond, Virginia, they have a high school, it's called Code RVA. And it's totally built to make coders. Half of them are going directly in the workforce after graduation because they have certifications in Oracle or Microsoft. The other half or AP Computer Science, they're headed off to Carnegie Mellon, Virginia Tech. That's the part that other states are actually doing that better than us. And the other part of it is we let a lot of our talent go. They come out of University of Maryland, which part of my taxes paid for, and they're working in Pittsburgh or they're working in Southern California. And I'm like, man, we need to be better at, and the answer to that problem is more communication between higher ed, high schools, and the employer business community. That's what, looking at other states, I'm like, we have such wealth and we have so many colleges. We don't do that as well as, say, South Florida.
And for me, on an inspirational note, it's so powerful that we're in this space, right? I can look on that wall and see all of these amazing founders and entrepreneurs that saw an issue in their city. It was like, I'm going to do something about it, right? And I think even on this panel, we have people who've seen a challenge in their communities and was like, I'm going to create a nonprofit. I'm going to leverage my connections. I'm going to leverage my networks, and I'm going to, make an impact. And I think sometimes those impacts are small, right? We had youth from City College and the Sobos program that saw the challenge of this, affordable internet does not work, does not meet my need, and they advocated with Comcast to get that changed, right? For in the ethos of things, maybe not the biggest change, but for those students, for people on that internet plan, that made the whole difference of being able to access school and graduate that school year. So I think just for me, it's always been inspirational about Baltimore City specifically, and how the city is such fertile ground for folks to be like, I see this challenge and I'm going to do something about it. I'm a transplant, that's why I stay, because I'm always in these rooms with these inspirational folks that do this work, and sometimes on panels with those folks as well. And I think that's truly going to make the difference for our city. I believe that with my whole heart.
For me, it's my thinking has always been, or at least for the last several years, is I'm impressed by how much free information is out there, particularly on YouTube. I've had so many issues where I've had a problem, with my car, and for some reason they have the exact fix for my particular car, or everything is on there, and you can learn how to code off of YouTube and other and Khan Academy and others. And the thing I struggle with is how do we get, and I'm kind of now focused on the youth part of, because if you want to make an impact, you have to do it at the level of the youth, because that's where you can really make an impact and investment, because they're in a place where they're aggregated, they're in high school theoretically, right? And so, or they're in middle school. And I've always struggled with the idea of how can we put together some sort of ad hoc program that makes them aware, because they have phones, and in some cases they have laptops, and laptops are relatively inexpensive, and they do have access to Wi-Fi, some more or less. Are there kind of almost renegade rebel curriculums that you could inflict upon them and kind of motivate kids to get that kind of hands-on technical training that they're not getting in a formal setting? I don't know, is that crazy? Is that possible?
No, that's how you do it.
Yeah.
So I'm a computer scientist by training, and I tell people in these schools, I'm like, nobody wants to learn computer science. Nobody. They're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, no, they want to fight a robot. They want to build a video game. They want to cure cancer. They want to they want to fix their own PC. They want to know how to watch YouTube during the school day and stuff like that. Yeah. So it's like Coding the School is a great example of how they are doing different programs using like video game development to trick children into learning how to code. Two of my children went to Cambridge Digital Harbor like the first year, and one of them now works as a professional 3D animator and CAD expert because he learned how to 3D print a million years ago at Digital Harbor. But Digital Harbor is like one place. Coding in school is like one thing. There's a football team at every high school. I'm like, start moving money from things that don't have jobs connected to them.
That is throwing strong punches, but
I don't know. After this week with the city poly thing, I think people may be rethinking their investment.
Well, that's a fascinating approach, because I that's how I've been wrestling with it. I'm thinking, how can you create some sort of renegade system for that? How can you do the same for digital access? Is there a way to I mean, Elon's piping the internet over to Ukraine right now as we speak. Why couldn't we just have Elon pump in the internet over the United States just all the time? I mean, why couldn't we strike a deal with it?
I mean, one of the things that Jonathan was pointing out earlier, though, right, is that we also have to convince people that they need it, right? Mm-hmm. And so part of the equation is not just access, it's adoption. And I think that, again, that's kind of where community partners play such an important role, because a lot of folks just don't trust the internet, right? And so you have to actually build trust, and you have to build the case for needing it, right? And explain to people, hey, like, you could have your physical therapy in your home via your mobile device if you have the right type of access, right? But we've got to like paint the picture for folks, because really adoption is part of the problem.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And the other part of it is people will go, well, if there's ubiquitous free Wi-Fi everywhere in this city for free, it'll just get used for crime and porn and video gaming. So you have to get Pat. I mean, is that not terrific?
No, no.
I think it's been,
Yes,
I
it is.
think it's been used for those things right now.
Yeah.
So-
You don't pay for it, so it'll be the same thing.
So, you know, you have that part of the equation too. You could actually make problems in the city worse by making it, say, for example, easier to do crime because you have ubiquitous Wi-Fi. You gotta like overcome these sort of, you know, when you put any technology in place, it can be used for good or evil.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the whole fear aspect that people tend to revert to because that's what they're familiar with and that's what they know. And when you start talking about new type of technology, there's not a lot of pathway for it. And if there's a pathway for it, it's always someplace else, not here in the United States. Or if it's done in the United States, it's done by a group of rebels.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, we don't want to mess with them. They might wind up going to jail, and we don't know if they're spying on us and everything else. And I just think that, you know, we need to also look at how do we just do it? You find somebody that says yes, and you prove it, and you do it.
Yeah.
You know, don't ask for permission, don't ask for forgiveness. Be true rebellious entrepreneurs and kick down doors. Just be hip hop and like, this is what we're focused on. This is what we're gonna do. Here's a subset. Okay, here's the data from all this. Okay, great. How do we scale it and go from there? Because if we continue to, how do we get buy-in? Where's the funding?
Yeah.
Where's this? There's funding, and there's that one person that's gonna say yes, who is a pirate and doesn't believe in systems.
Yeah.
And they're out there, and they're here in Baltimore, and they will say yes. But it's like, okay, like you said, where's the infrastructure that's going to support this, but where's the vision of where we're going?
Yeah.
And we just need to stop being scared. You know, okay, whatever. If the system doesn't improve it, so what? The system is meant to be proven wrong. You know, that's why entrepreneurs exist. I mean, if we are entrepreneurs by pacification of being passive, then why are you calling yourself an entrepreneur?
Yeah.
And I think there's also lessons to be learned from other cities. There are other models out there.
Yeah.
And some of them have been successful and some of them have been colossal failures. And that's, you know, an entrepreneurial environment. You stand on the shoulders of giants and you learn from the guys and gals that blew it.
Yeah.
And there are cities that are wired, right? I mean, they're basically, there's internet everywhere, aren't there? I want to say Boston is, good parts of Boston are, right?
Boston. I mean, there are towns in Ohio that are doing it.
Yeah.
Out in Seattle, they're doing it. Tennessee, they're doing it. And so I think that, you know, I'm sure you know as well. I mean, they're just all these that people are doing it. And they're getting it done.
Yeah.
You know, and there's no reason why other cities can't do it. But it's like, what's the public health benefit from it? How's it tackling social determinants of health? I mean, you can look at it from public health standpoint of view. What's the ROI? How is it going to make my thing more efficient, better? How am I not going to lose revenue? Because if one side goes up, another side's got to go down. Someone stands to lose something. And so it's are we ready to make that change? But also, how do we engage individuals to make this the new normal and not be afraid of it?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you go on the internet, you go to Facebook and you set it up. Your first bunch of, through your filters could be a whole bunch of hate. And if that's your first introduction, you're just like, what the hell am I doing?
On the internet?
Yeah.
Hate on the internet?
No, not at all. You know, you know, it's just like, you know, but it's the education piece and educating people about, okay, well, don't let your first step scare you. At one point, you were a child, you were a baby, you were an infant, and you took your first steps without fear.
Yeah.
You fell down, you got up. You fell down, you got up. But it's got to be done in a way where, for some people, it takes a little bit more handling.
Yeah.
I mean, for others, they're just like, okay, I'm gone, and I'll call you when I need you.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that, you know, like I said, sometimes we just need to get out our own way. But we also need to understand that those who know need to be a better bridge and connectors.
I think part of it is like, how do we fund it? And then how do we maintain it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, like, there's a lot of federal funding coming down the pike. And so how do we make sure that we're designing networks and programs that can be funded once and maintained in perpetuity? And I think that is probably going to take a public-private partnership and organizations that, you know, have the wherewithal and the expertise to maintain these networks.
So Crown Castle does it for Enoch Pratt, for all the libraries, right?
So most recently, we sponsored free outdoor Wi-Fi at the Enoch Pratt branches. We sponsored 5 of the branches, but they have it at all of the branches.
Right. So how difficult would it be for other sponsors to do that for parks? And, how problematic is that?
I mean, I don't
Public
like.
spaces.
So there's lots of like elements to it, right? So the reason why it works at Enoch Pratt is because they have the infrastructure, right? So they have the rooftops to install the antennas,
right?
And they have the staff to maintain it, and so it's really just a matter of like having the right combination of assets to make it work.
I'm just piggybacking on Jonathan's idea of going renegade.
But there are lots of, I mean, it's in parks across the country, right? Like, but again though, like you need the right combination of assets because like ultimately, like not everyone can get on one antenna, right? It's not gonna work. And so you need to, I mean, like you know this better than anyone. I'm not like a radio frequency engineer. You probably understand it way better than I do, right? But at the end of the day, like you need a lot of collaboration by basically the property owners to like make it work, and then the expertise to maintain it.
Okay. And I will say that on a very positive note, like that PCs for People.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, several major funders in the city, I want to say Deutsche Foundation and Able, brought PCs for People here. It worked very well in Cleveland and some other cities. And that thing is sustainable, and that allows people to get a device for like $100.
Right.
And with support and stuff like that. So like on that part of the digital divide, we actually have a pretty good solution that came in out of the entrepreneurial, you know, initial prime the pump from the funder community. And now has created something that not only supplies devices, it's a workforce development program that is highly effective. And, you know, the corporate community is donating, you know, 18-wheelers full of laptops and desktops. And so here in Baltimore, you know, if people know about it, they can get the device. I wish it would have been around like 5 years ago, I tell you that.
Sure. Well, I think we've beaten that up. What do you think? We covered that pretty well. And anyway, on that, I think we're coming up to the 8 o'clock hour. So with that, thank you for everyone for your contributions and your insights. And we'll wrap it up for tonight. And thank you very much for watching.
Were there any questions?